Well, look, it's 11:01. I think we should crack on. So I'm joined by Nick Harvey, who's managing partner of Escalate Disputes, and Luke Venner, who is director in the restructuring team at Bishop Fleming. Escalate is a great partner of Capitalise. We've been working with them for quite some time now, and obviously they are responsible for part of our recovery product. And Luke and various members of the Bishop Fleming team are a firm that are one of the Capitalise subscribers, and we've had great success with those guys, across a whole bunch of different transactions, vanilla or structured. So we're going to be looking at the landscape today, probably more in the recovery space, more in the restructuring space, thinking about the insolvencies and some of the challenges that are kind of lying ahead. I'm going to whip through some slides super fast. For those of you who were on the last webinar, I will apologise, but there's a couple of updates in terms of them. But the aim of this really is to just try and get everybody up to the same speed. So, as many of you know, we've had the great support from the British Business Bank and the government in terms of lending, whether it's bounce backs, CBILS, the Future Fund, or large CBILS. We're up to 71 billion odd of lending, more than 1.5 million businesses. It's been an incredible lifeline. And one of the key things that that has changed in this space is that on the 6th of February, the British Business Bank announced the mechanism for the extension of bounce backs. So every single bounce back holder will be sent a letter 3 months before their repayments start, which will give them the option for extending their payment profile, which is a great support for the businesses that are out there. In terms of insolvencies, if we're looking back to pre-COVID, there was a 6.8, 6.9% forecast that the insolvency market was going to grow and more businesses were going to find challenging times. When we look at those numbers in September, so a few months old, the forecasts for the number were as high as 27%. But a pretty important think tank, the IPPR, came out with data on the 10th, pretty damning messaging ahead of the budget, that 600,000 SMEs were going to be struggling and in this space, and that was going to put potentially 9 million jobs at risk. That was on the 10th, and we've subsequently had some announcements from the government, which we'll address in this chat. So, lots coming up on March 31st. Of course, we've got a budget on the 3rd. And so a lot of these things, are going to be discussed, changed, improved, tapered. We don't know, but we're thinking about it. And, we'll lend our thoughts into that today. Whether it's the deferred VAT from Q2 last year, whether it's the insolvency and the moratorium, we'll touch on that in a second, ban on evictions, the furlough scheme, the business rates, and so on. So, there's a lot of support that is due to be ending on the 31st of March, but we've got the budget on the 3rd. And Kirsty and I will be talking through that live on the budget. A little bit scary, haven't done that before. So, we'll see how we get on, but hopefully we can extend some value into you guys. And just from a Capitalise perspective, we're seeing 21% of the businesses that are sitting on Capitalise Monitor are eligible for CBILS and haven't yet taken. 37% of the businesses have got unmet liabilities from the cash that we can see within their accounts. 39%, probably no surprises here, have got late payments and bad debts. Obviously, there are various zero reports and things that Nick might touch on, where those numbers are pretty huge, into over 100 billion. And from a credit score perspective, which we discussed in our first predictions webinar, we talked about the low credit environment and the systemic downgrades that are coming. So this is potentially the first little tickle from the government, I think, in terms of some of those statements. So on the 2 days ago, on the 16th, we posted out, will the moratorium be extended? I'd like to think that Capitalise was responsible for the statement that came a couple of hours later, but I do put it down to coincidence. Some changes in legislation that give a hint that the moratoriums and winding up protections are going to be extended. So that's it from the slides perspective, but I'm going to use that, Luke, to maybe open up the questioning. I mean, what are your initial thoughts about this announcement from the 16th of February from the government?
I think it's indicative of the fact that there are going to be further assistance going forward. I think none of us know what the detail is. We know that the likes of the winding up petitions, for example, there's been a ban on those until the end of March. But I think the fact that they're giving us scope, giving themselves scope to extend this until April 2022, does, I think, suggest that there's going to be more assistance going forward. And I think that's going to be necessary, because as we move into kind of post-lockdown territory, there is going to be inevitably lots and lots of problems. So I think, yeah, it's a fairly, I think, positive thing from the government, but perhaps not so positive in terms of allowing businesses to recover cash and pursue debt.
Well, thanks, Luke. I'm not sure. Nick, are you having
interference
there for?
Yeah, I was.
Luke.
Not now, but I was with just
when we're talking. Well, we'll see how we go. If that pops up again, Luke, I might ask you to just leave and then come back in again. And just kind of see how we go. I guess it's a mixed measure. Obviously, we need to get some support, further support on that, and giving the ability for businesses to kind of trade out. Some of the challenges there are that for businesses that may not be able to trade out, it is just going to extend it, and it is just going to kind of make that harder. So, yeah. I mean, 600,000 businesses from the IPPR. I think, Nick, I saw something that you posted on LinkedIn, 900,000 businesses from LSE. Obviously there's big ranges in terms of these potential insolvencies. I mean, in the real world, Luke, from a restructuring perspective, I mean, what are you seeing? What's coming across the Bishop Fleming desk?
Can you hear me okay, first of all?
Much better.
Is that okay? Good. Yeah. Sorry, my internet's a little bit flaky, to say the least. What are we seeing? Well, I think when we went into COVID initially, we all expected lots of problems. Speaking to companies, I think a lot of these feared the worst, but actually it's been the case that we've seen lots of companies sort of diversify and thrive, perhaps more than they thought they would in the first place. And a lot of companies have been able to sort of tick over because, as I said, there's been a temporary ban on petitions. There's really been a sort of inability to apply pressure because of these various SEGA initiatives that came in last year. There's been a lot of government intervention with furlough, with the bounce backs, with the C bills, with the sort of tax deferral. So actually, I think it has offered a lifeline for lots of businesses. And interestingly, the insolvency landscape has been much different than what we expect. We're normally used to lots of appointments, but I think nationally the number of appointments is decreased quite a lot. So I think what we're doing and what we're seeing a lot of is helping companies begin to think about post-lockdown and how they might trade, thinking about forecasting and all that sort of stuff. Really, it's really about planning for all eventualities. But fortunately, the number of insolvencies is down. What are we seeing? We're actually seeing lots of solvent restructurings and lots of solvent liquidations, which is quite interesting, because when we went into this, like I said, we kind of feared for the worst. But there's lots of companies at the moment that are sort of gearing themselves up for potential capital gains changes in the budget in March. I know we often talk about this, and there's often fear, and often these things don't get changed, but a lot of companies are going through these processes to try and extract capital. In certain cases, yes, there's retirement, but I think a lot of other times businesses are quite worried about the future landscape. So they're kind of thinking, well, let's kind of get out now. Let's leave while the business is strong. So insolvencies are down, but I think we're all expecting things to change quite a bit going forward. Although, as I said, with the sort of updates this week about the April 2022 extensions, who kind of knows, really?
I think it's interesting that one of the key points there is the solvent liquidations. And what's coming through. I think it's something that we've discussed on a number of webinars previously, around people just believing that now is the right time to to wind it up and say enough's enough for our business, because they just don't want to go through another recession, another challenge, another time. I mean, is that the kind of the rationale? Is it like, you know, what's the sort of experience that's taking people through that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair point. We actually spoke with a company yesterday who, I think, to be fair, that they can probably trade out going forward, but they've got to a stage where they've had such a tough year, and it's such an uncertain climate going forward. And I know there's financial considerations, but actually you've got to look after yourself mentally as well. And sometimes people just haven't got the appetite or the strength, if you like, to continue. So we can certainly help businesses move away from these sort of challenges and ensure that they're dealt with properly and in a structured fashion. But yeah, it just depends, doesn't it? I think there are lots of companies that were probably struggling pre-COVID that perhaps have been given a bit of a lifeline, but they still think that there's just no real future. So take advice, I think, is the key thing. If you're not wanting to continue, then don't continue, but just make sure that you're taking advice and you're doing it properly.
Yes.
How about you, Nick? What are you sort of seeing at the moment?
Similar. I mean, I probably echo a lot of what you're saying. Maybe a slightly different slant on it. I think I certainly feel that there's a false reality out there. That I do think there's a little bit of calm before the storm. I think your mortgage holidays, your rent holidays, your job retention schemes, your furlough and stuff, and obviously the reforms that you've touched on, they have created sort of a comfort blanket, as it were, that's been wrapped around SME businesses, which, you know, it has created that false reality. And I think there is a fallout to happen as things keep getting extended. Of course, that sort of can get kicked further down, and that false reality continues. But I don't think you can get away from there is a train coming down that track. And it is going to impact on SMEs. I know, in a sense, that you know, there are going to be insolvencies. The IPPR, they're not daft. You know, that I think there are going to be some redundancies and repossession forfeitures and so on. There are all that. And I don't want to be a sort of a harbinger of doom there in that regard. But I think if you flip that round, I actually think that for accountants and the professions, we can really step in at the moment and help SMEs massively by just helping them take their head out of the sand, open their eyes, look at yes, it's coming, but how do we best position ourselves, go through the efficiencies and you know, cut out wastage, speak to the likes of yourselves, Luke, you know, get plans in place, speak to creditors, put it, you know, embrace the problems, get them sorted, and I think they can come out the other side, and be resilient. I think the other thing I'd say, for me specifically, in where we are in terms of, you know, disputed litigation and debt recovery, I think there's two things that are happening at the moment. Is that with the changes, there's a bit of a debtors charter. There's a bit of a platform for exploitation there for serial debtors. There's a little bit there which is causing problem for SMEs, and I think what sits alongside it, which is the bit of the worrying bit, is that there's then built in a bit of inertia by SMEs about whether they can do anything about it, and so almost they're sitting back going, well, if I can't do anything, you know, they hear all these noises about the insolvency rules, we can't do anything, and so on. And that's dangerous, because the fact of the matter is, and I've said this on the previous webinars that I've done, is that the fact of the matter is the courts are still open. You can take enforcement action. You know, the courts are doing online hearings. They are trying to get their house in order to help businesses take action. And so it is very much a case of he who shouts loudest, he who jumps highest. They will be the head of the queue. And so SMEs need to get their house in order and all of that and get cracking. The one thing I would just finally say on that is that in terms of the survey that we're doing, Paul, and sort of Capitalise survey, is that I would sort of encourage people to get involved in that and provide their feedback, because that can help us then pull together what's happening on the ground for people, and then feed that back out and give some meaningful input so that SMEs can see, hold on, this is where I sit within the wider landscape. and perhaps gain some support from that, as well as understanding of where they are and what to do. So I do sort of invite people to get involved with that. I think it will be helpful.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we'll make sure that survey goes out afterwards, and if anybody wants to join in and get that out, then we'd love your help. Thank you. So Nick, just a point there in terms of like the courts are still open. Perhaps for those who are not lawyers and litigators, such as myself, can you just give us a little bit of colour around what that means in the context of the protections that are there at the moment?
Yeah. Okay. So Luke can expand on in greater detail than me, but in terms of winding up petitions, you can't do that and so on. But you can. That's in the insolvency courts. But what you can do is you can issue claims, and you can get court judgments. You can still get charging orders. You can still do attachment of earnings. There are still measures there. You can still get High Court enforcement officer. There are restrictions on terms of what they can do in terms of turning up and stuff in the current environment, but there are things you can do. And the point I'd make is this, is that if you get on with it now, whilst others are sitting back, you will be ahead of the creditor queue. So even if you are restrained and are slowed down in that process, at least when you are able to do it, you are ahead of the game. And that is the key here, because you do not want to be where cash flows are tight further down the queue. You've got to get to the front of that queue. And that's where I think, what I'm saying is that, they are doing Zoom telephone hearings. In many respects, it's become more efficient. So rather than having to travel around the country, get agents to go and attend hearings, you do it all like this,
Yeah.
And there's alternative dispute resolution. Mediators are being flexible, that you're doing online mediations now. So that things are happening. I've gone into the dark here. There is a way around these things, and it is happening.
Yeah, I think if I can just jump in on that, I think getting to the front of the queue is quite important, because we tend to find from a sort of insolvency perspective that actually those that shout the loudest tend to do better than those that perhaps kind of defer the problem. So I think, yes, whilst there are restrictions, as you said, Nick, around sort of winding up petitions, the courts are very much open for applying for judgments, for example. So I think, don't just ignore problems. I think we all appreciate that the country is a difficult, it's a very difficult landscape. Lots of businesses are struggling, and I think we don't want to put ourselves under too much pressure, but ultimately we've also got to look after our own businesses, and there's mechanisms that we can use to still sort of pursue recovery.
I think one of the key points there, and we experience this from from the recovery perspective, in terms of not necessarily inertia but fear, in terms of proceeding down this line. Will it affect my relationship with a client? Well, presumably yes, but it is at the point where you take a view and try and process through that. And so
Paul, I think that's absolutely spot on, because I think that is also an issue, is that in this current environment, to what extent do you take a hard line? To what extent do you grant forbearance? And I think absolutely at the moment, everybody to a degree got to stick together and help each other, but that doesn't mean don't stick for your contractual rights. Do put payment plans in place. You can give time and latitude, but get security put behind it. Build the story of that is pre-COVID indebtedness. What exactly is it, and get it documented that they admit the debts and so on. They're the things that you can do. You can do now to get your house in order, and should be doing, because then when you do end up, hopefully you won't, but if you do end up in court, you can do so much more about it.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a great piece of advice. I think, Luke, in terms of some of the instructions that you may well have been taking on, how is that kind of ethos of, I guess, the ethics of this and getting into that kind of coming across?
I think it probably comes back to what I've said. There's this I think feeling that we're all in a difficult place. So actually, if we can kind of help one another to an extent, then we can kind of come out of this together in a better shape. But having said that, we've also seen a number of businesses that have been sort of hit very hard by other businesses who haven't been paying them, and they want to take a harder line, whether that's going for judgment or whether it's sort of coming back to Nick's point around sort of getting your house in order and making sure that you're in a good position, so that actually when things do begin to sort of unravel a little bit, and we do begin to operate in a sort of more normal situation, then you're better placed to sort of pursue recovery. That's kind of what it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be perfectly honest.
So actually a question that's come in, which I think is probably a good time to ask this right now, which is, you know, Nick, you talk about the courts still open, you know, there's the Zooms and these kind of things, but, you know, is there a backlog? Is it taking longer? You know, in the press yesterday, they were talking about Nightingale courts. You know, so could a corporate insolvency process proceed faster and cut a creditor out, or is there a ranking?
Well, the speed of action gets you to the front of the queue, as I've said. But are there delays? Well, there were blooming out before COVID. There were delays. I mean, the court process isn't the quickest, put it that way. And there's a lack of resource and so on, which so it's slow. But and I'd be lying if I didn't say that COVID hadn't slowed things up further. However, you know, what I can say is the court, they are doing their best. You know, as I say, they have been reasonably quick to get themselves sorted so they can do these telephone hearings and get the functionality and the technology there so that they can do it. So yes, it's slower, but I go back to what I just said before. It might be slower, but get yourself on that treadmill, get yourself there, get yourself going. That's my big message there.
So, I mean, maybe continuing with you then, Nick. You know, pre-COVID, there was 40 billion tied up in commercial disputes. Presumably that number is just getting bigger and bigger. The Law Society, which pulled that number together, hasn't done the survey, hasn't done, you know, the work in terms of establishing what it is now. I mean, Escalate's mission, I guess, is to trying to recover as much of that 40 billion as possible, you know, and chip away at it, you know, from your part of the world. What are your predictions for 21 then, you know, and potentially beyond?
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely right. That is absolutely what we're trying to do. I think just to seize on the 40 billion figure. I mean, you said tied up in commercial disputes. That actually was a figure that was sort of being written off. Debts being written off. And if you go back to March last year, pre-March last year, there were further reports done by the Legal Services Board and Zero, which you touched on just before, but you know, 131 billion is tied up in late payments, which, you know, that again is only going to be worse with COVID and so on. So yeah, in terms of first prediction, pretty damn obvious that, you know, cash pressures are just going to increase. But the thing that I'd say with that is that there's an even more worrying stat that sits in, we brought out at the same time. YouGov brought out a report that said that only 11% of SMEs will turn to a lawyer to solve their bad debts and disputes. And that's pretty shocking, because what that's saying is that 89% don't actually think that they've got a solution out there to resolve those problems for them. So we've got a real thing building here. You've got bad debts growing, disputes increasing, and yet 89% don't think they've got a solution to solve it. And so 100%, that's why we set up Escalate. That's why we set that out. That's why we've teamed up with Capitalise on you know, Capitalise Recovery. And it is to put a solution out there. But if people don't know about it, and they don't know there is a cost-effective solution, there's 89% there that are floundering, and we can help them. And that's what I would say to, you know, obviously a lot of accountants on listening to this, that, you know, that is a real opportunity to help our SME businesses, because at this moment in time we are right within that sweet spot of what they need, and you know, we can help. So that's certainly my first prediction. A couple of others. I think if we step back at the moment, I think real estate lawyers are going to be very, very busy boys. You know, you've got flexible working, it's come in far more. That means that, you know, what's going to be the requirements on office space? Are we going to have a situation where people don't need as much space, are going to want to serve break notices to go and reduce their office space? Alongside that, you've got probably tenants with rent arrears, landlords wanting to take action, but if they take action and they forfeit, well, are they going to have a tenant there who's going to be able to come in and take over that space? Are they going to be able to pay the rent at the same level that they were? So there's a whole host of things in there for real estate lawyers to get their teeth into, and that's just going to increase over the next 12, 18 months. I touched on flexible working. That also is going to, I mean, that's causing all sorts of things at the moment. You've got the fact that technology, digital acceleration, that's just gone, you know, it's just going to go massive and it's going to increase. You've got cloud technology, document management. I'd say blockchain. I don't profess to know the ins and outs of blockchain, but I know that that's gaining massive momentum. You know, Zoom, Teams, all that sort of, that's just going to increase. That you've got the decentralization of business, so that you've got then far more businesses working more agile and remote and so on. That's only going to increase. The genie's out of the bottle, really. There, I think we can do it. So that's going to force through technological change to make us more agile, so that we can do it and embrace it even more. Just so I think that's a massive thing that's going to develop next 12 months and so on. And then the final one, just to touch on quickly, is, and it's fallen off the radar as such, but I think had it not been for COVID, we'd have all been sick to our back teeth of hearing about Brexit and the impact of Brexit and what it was going to do. But the fact of the matter is that whilst it might have fallen slightly behind COVID in terms of time on news channels and so on, the reality is the impact of it is going to be no less, and it's going to be a massive input for a lot of SMEs who are doing, you know, cross border trade. And I'll just highlight a few of the things that come out. Supply chain issues and regulations, you know, whether you've got sort of goods that lots of constituent parts, you know, you're going to get things like sort of tariff, country of origin requirements, rule changes, import export tariffs and stuff kicking in, border issues, speed of cross transfer across borders, changes to the labour market, free movements dropped off, intellectual property implications. You're going to have to register in the EU as well as over here, your trademarks and your design rights and so on. Funding, is funding going to drop off on EU funding? You've got, and then the whole legal infrastructure is not quite yet built. That's going to have impacts. You've got, from my side of things, reciprocal enforcement that's going to drop away that you had before. Massive impact. Data regulation, security, lots and lots of things. And I think all I'd say there with that is, again, it's getting our house in order. There will be impact on our SMEs, and as a professional community, we've got to be looking out to try and provide solutions and help them not bury their heads, embrace those things. You know, we can win in terms of long-term relationships, but they can win in terms of short-term gains for being helped out with, you know, the people we can bring to the table to provide answers for them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that we've noticed at Capitalise is, you know, and obviously all of the accountants have felt it, you know, implicitly in terms of their day-to-day, they've been thrust into the very centre of almost every, you know, government initiative, you know, whether it's the furlough schemes or JRS 1, 2, 3, C-bills, bounce backs, you know, moving into corporate finance worlds and restructuring and having conversations that they probably never had before. And you know, that pace of change, I think, much like the flexible working thing, I think is a systemic shift also for the professional service community. You talk about flexible working. I mean, I'm proud to say that, you know, we've got people at Capitalise in Brazil, in Canada, in the Netherlands, in Portugal, you know, obviously in London and dotted around. And you know, as you say, that's here to stay, I think, right, in terms of, you know,
how people are seeing it can work. Yeah, and that's the thing people are afraid of, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, you know, lockdown one, we were sort of thinking, yeah, everybody's going to end up back in the office. Lockdown 2, you're like, huh. By the time we're here, like suddenly you're like, actually, this is, you know, there's a seismic change here. So you mentioned something there. I've got a question, and then there are a number of questions coming in, so I'm mindful to get to those. Is that you mentioned about landlords.
Yep.
Absent of the announcement yesterday or 2 days ago from the government in terms of kind of, you know, extending some of the stuff out, and, you know, appreciate your comments about getting your house in order. I mean, are there any sectors that are going to go on the attack, do you think? You know, the people that are going to come after the SMEs, you know, for the rent arrears. Also, obviously, landlords are, you know, are in the mix there.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that, I mean, they are in the mix, but I really do think there's a really interesting conundrum there for landlords, because it's, you know, yes, there'll be rent arrears. Yes, they'll want to to go and get after those rent arrears. But, you know, what is going to happen? You know, if they go and forfeit, are they going to be left with an empty property, or are they going to be left only being able to rent at a lower level? Are they better? Yes, there are rent arrears, working with their tenants to go and keep them in and accommodate them and keep them on the hook. So it's an interesting one. So yes, I think they will be wanting to take action, but what action that will end up, you know, being would be interesting. And I think that will purvey across a number of sectors. I think, you know, creditors, lenders have been, certainly mainstream lenders have been very keen to be seen to be doing the right thing, forbearance, you know, FCA, treating customers fairly. And again, all spot on, all right. But when's the tipping point? There will come a point where they want to start recovering. How are they going to do that? Yeah, plans in place. But even with a plan in place, that is going to gradually increase the pressure again on cash flows. And it comes back to the same point of that's where we as professionals can help them and help them get those orderly plans in place that built into their cash flow management and stuff like that can help them over a period of time work through all these problems. But yeah, there will be some on the attack, but what does attack look like? Yeah. I think will be interesting.
Luke, from your perspective, I mean, HMRC, I mean, where are they in there? They're normally the creditor of choice who, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been interesting with HMRC because there's obviously the ability to sort of defer tax now, which is great because, as we all know, tax is it's always one of the biggest challenges for lots of companies, and certainly in a sort of insolvency context, HMRC is normally left floundering, which isn't a good thing. But I think, yeah, the fact that there are tax deferrals is going to make a big difference. Will that translate into the wider market, and will it translate into the trade creditors being as relaxed about payments? Probably not. But if there's a bit of flexibility on tax payments, then it's going to do no harm, is it? It's going to help businesses. The question mark is, though, how long can that go on for? Because clearly they need to start raising tax revenue again. So I think it's a short-term breathing space, but you've got to plan for not the next 12 months, you've got to plan for the next 5 years and beyond, and that's going to include paying taxes again. I guess in terms of the Q2 VAT, you know, tax deferments from 2020 that are obviously due at the end of at the end of March, we may well start to get a sense of what that means and what the what HMRC are going to be doing. Interesting question. This has come in. You know, do you think the government would ever take equity stakes in businesses for tax that are owed? Good question. Good question. I'd probably be surprised, to be perfectly honest. But who knows? Who knows? We're in uncharted territory. We've not been through a situation like this before, really. So I think kind of watch this space, to be honest. Yeah. I think we'll get that.
What's the wider impact of that if they did start going down that road? Yeah, conflicts of interest and all that sort of stuff. Interesting. Yeah,
I'd be surprised, to be perfectly honest. I'd be very surprised. But then I think we've all been pretty surprised this year, haven't we? So. Yeah, well, they've just invested in just over 1,000, you know, startups, you know, with a reasonably large chunk of cash, you know, to keep the venture community and, you know, those funds flowing. So, you know, interesting
first sentiment. So Luke, I mean, what about you? What are you thinking about in terms of, you know, the balance of 21, and I guess with a particular sort of recovery insolvency lens?
Yeah, so I mean, the key thing is we know that the government assistance will subside at some point. We know that as we begin to move to normality, then businesses really need to gear up for working capital challenges going forward. So they need to start thinking about paying for stock. The furlough scheme is going to come to an end. We're going to have to start paying staff again. We're going to have to catch up with supplier arrears. Coming back to the point about tax, the deferrals won't last forever. You're going to have your bounce backs and your C-bills. They're going to have to start being repaid. And added to that, really, you've got less visibility over your income streams and problems within supply chains. So I think it's going to be a very challenging landscape. It's possibly going to be more challenging than what we've seen over the last 12 months. And unfortunately, we do expect insolvencies to rise. And I mean, pre-COVID, there was lots of sort of stats around zombie companies. So these companies that aren't really sort of contributing to the economy to any great extent, and they've been sort of problematic for a long time. And these sort of companies, they're going to be failing. There will be lots of sort of good companies pre-COVID that will have problems going forward because of bad debt, the knock-on effect of bad debts, the loss of key customers, all that sort of stuff. So I think it is going to be a difficult sort of 12 months and beyond. Having effective sort of working capital management is going to be crucially important. And one of those key things is about getting your house in order with your customers. And this kind of comes back to Nick's point, really. And this is one of the key reasons that we partner with Escalate. It's to give our clients a mechanism through which they can sort of recover debts, to resolve disputes, and do that without risk and without any real sort of upfront costs. So I think get your house in order. It's going to be a difficult period. There will be businesses. I mean, we've certainly seen businesses across Bishop Fleming that have diversified, that have actually been sort of quite opportunistic and have actually thrived and done quite well out of COVID. And I think there will be further sort of M&A opportunities going forward. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I think the overriding message is it's going to be a very difficult landscape. And that's kind of why I guess the likes of myself and other people in the restructuring insolvency world exist. It's about having these early conversations. What we don't want to be doing is ideally talking to businesses when a kind of winding up petition has landed on the desk. It's about having those early conversations. It's about planning. It's about having some foresight, and it's about ensuring that, okay, we're in a tricky period, but actually with a bit of planning, we can hopefully come out the other side in as a gooder position or possibly a stronger position. But early advice is always key to that. And it's always unfortunately, one of my bugbears is a lot of the stuff we see, it is too late. And when you're looking at this stuff and it's kind of 12th hour, then you are limited as to what your options are. But if you can have these early conversations, it might be that cash isn't a problem now, but it could be a problem in 12 months' time. So if you can kind of gear yourself up for that and you can start thinking about other options, then I just think it widens the chance of recovery, basically.
I think that's one of the key messages that we've got to focus on out of this session is getting the message out is have the conversation earlier, because there's a curve in terms of success. When speaking with your team and similar type teams around the country, in terms of if it's at that last minute, the chances of pulling a rabbit out is going to be very, very difficult. But getting in, having the early conversations, sorting out your creditors, debtors, getting into that place, into it, and so that you can have the appropriate conversations early enough, will mean the difference between those businesses being able to trade out or not. So obviously that's a key message. I think it's a difficult reality, because obviously that probably hasn't changed whether it's COVID or not. That's probably it's a truism over the years, the decades, but ultimately now probably more important than ever, from that context. A couple of questions then to answer. I think, question for you, Nick. What percentage of cases that are coming in from this recovery perspective? Obviously, this is a sort of, you know, a no-win, no-fee insured product all the way through to a high court. There's like a couple of paths that this can do. Luke's identified that obviously, you know, they're one of your partner firms, as are Capitalise. What percentage actually end up going to court, and which, you know, kind of get mediated out and managed?
Vast majority mediate out or settle even before that. We've had, I mean, we've seen over 700 since 2017. We've seen about 750 cases. We've taken on about 250. We've had one case go to trial, and we won. But nearly all will settle before that. So what the power of what we've got being the fully funded, fully insured solution is that for our clients, they've got the financial muscle to go to court if needs be, but it's that messaging which enables them to be able to go to a mediation or beforehand, go to the finance director, managing director of their opponent and say, well, we've got this team behind us. What do you got? Are you going to have to pay as you go along? Do you want to come and talk about this sensibly now? Because we're not actually after the world. We are here to be commercial. And that is such a powerful message. And I think also the strength that having the package behind them gives them, and the support and comfort and the de-risking means that they can approach things and tackle those problems that perhaps otherwise they'd be reticent to do.
Yeah,
so it's all powerful.
I think there's a sort of a powerful imagery as well, which is, you know, it's like David and Goliath opportunity as well, right? So there is the opportunity to, you know, to give David his slingshot to
yeah,
you know,
that's absolutely the case. I mean, so we are careful a little bit in the messaging of the David Goliath. You're absolutely right that it does do that, but of course we're not just about you, David. We do appeal beyond, but I do see what you're saying, and it's absolutely true what you're saying.
So I think, you know, from Capitalise perspective, we've had a whole bunch of successful recoveries. I think, you know, the average ticket that we've seen, typically the accountants that are using us are putting through smaller tickets to start with in cases. I think it's about 17,000 is the average, but we've actually got, I think, £1.5 million in process with you guys at the moment, you know, through various stages. Obviously, we're trying to get that through mediation because it's probably faster, you know. It's but obviously, you know, as you say, you've got the kind of litigation behind it. I think I'm kind of mindful of time. We've kind of there's still other questions that I'm probably not going to be able to get to, but I think I probably need to kind of wrap it up. We've got 2 minutes left. So, I mean, are there any kind of final thoughts, I guess, you know, from either you, Nick, or you, Luke, that, you know, should be key takeaways for, you know, for the people who've logged in today?
Yeah, shall I? Yeah,
go for it.
First? Kick off? Yep. I mean, I think, and I kind of bleat on about this internally within Bishop Fleming because we're obviously much bigger than restructuring insolvency, but our success as a counselling advisory firm does depend on our clients' success, and that's obvious. But I think it makes it apparent that actually we're not just there to be accountants; we're there to be advisors, and it's about being proactive. It's about thinking outside of the box. It's about helping clients with sort of planning and direction. It's about involving ourselves in those conversations that can actually help your clients thrive going forward. And we like to think as a kind of restructuring outfit that speaks and works with a number of external accountants. We can help with those conversations. I mean, particularly the working capital challenges is going to be key. And if you can help your clients with funding through the likes of Capitalise and with debt recovery through Escalate, I think that's great, because if we can help with that, then they're going to be in better positions going forward. The key thing that I've said is about early conversation. Don't wait until the statutory accounts are done. Make sure that you're having these regular conversations. I'm sure most of you will anyway, but the sooner these problems are addressed, the better the chance of sort of moving forward positively, really. And I think as well, just on the restructuring side of things, have these conversations early. And if you ever need to have a conversation about anything, feel free to speak to us. We're always open to conversation. But if problems are left too late, then unfortunately things become a little bit more sort of tricky to resolve. Sorry, that was my
no,
two pence.
great.
Anyway.
I think two things there is the remember the curve, visual. The sooner you get that conversation, the better the outcome. It is not falling down to the x-axis for a poor outcome. Nick?
Yeah, I think to taking the words out of my mouth, I think that's absolutely spot on. I think there's a bit of a bigger picture mentality needed. And Professor, have all the answers for accountants there, bag not mine. But I do think that as the trusted advisor, that there is a really important role to play currently to help SMEs through what are going to be choppy waters. And I think that by having that more holistic approach, really trying to provide add value, try and provide those extra sort of service lines or other, such as Capitalise or Escalate, or otherwise help bring those professional communities together as an overall solution for SMEs. Collaborating is crucial, because by doing that, you're building the rapport, the relationship, which might be a long-term relationship. The SMEs will get an early win, but you'll get the long-term win, most definitely. I think that to me is definitely the way forward for all of us.
Perfect, thanks, Nick. Hannah, I'm not sure if you can just throw up a quick survey just for those, and as we go through that process, I will. If you can just answer this survey, would you like to know more about debt recovery, and some of the processes that we've got going on here, and we will come back to you accordingly. For those that are liking these series, the next one that we'll be hosting is on the 11th of March. Well, we'll be looking at another recovery product, this time kind of focusing on R&D and the ability to get tax credits. But no doubt one of the hot topics post budget. So we'll be following that up a week later with grants. So both R&D and grants, we're expecting some relatively supportive messaging to come out of the budget in that context. So I think that leads me to say thank you so much, Nick. Super insightful. Thank you, Luke, for joining. Wonderful as always. It's been a great. I'd love to say I've got a fire next to me, but it's been a virtual fireside chat. And thank you so much for joining, and thanks everybody else for attending. Thanks as always.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.